There comes a moment in life when you must stop explaining yourself, not because you have nothing to say, because you have finally understood that not everyone deserves access to your thoughts, your plans, your energy, or your presence. You have spent too long being available for conversations that lead nowhere. Available for people who only remember you when they need something. Available to explain decisions that were never theirs to question. Available to defend your silence, your ambition, your distance, your boundaries. There comes a moment when you realize that your mind has become crowded with voices that do not belong to you. The opinions of other people, their expectations, their judgments, their doubts, their demands, their questions, their reactions. All of them have slowly entered your thoughts until you can no longer distinguish between what you truly want and what you have been conditioned to want. You wake up thinking about what others are doing. You make decisions based on how they might respond. You hesitate because someone may criticize you. You change your plans because someone may not understand them. You remain in situations that exhaust you because leaving would disappoint someone. And gradually your own voice becomes the quietest voice in your life. This is why disappearing can become necessary. Not because you hate people, not because you want to punish anyone, not because you are trying to create drama. You disappear because your mind needs distance from the constant pressure of being observed, evaluated, and influenced. When you are always surrounded by other people's opinions, it becomes difficult to think clearly. Every decision begins to pass through the filter of approval. You ask yourself, will they like this, before asking, is this right for me? You wonder whether your choices will make sense to others before considering whether they make sense to your future. This is how people lose themselves without realizing it. They do not wake up one morning and decide to abandon their identity. It happens slowly, a compromise here, a silence there, a decision made to keep someone happy, a dream abandoned because people laughed at it, a goal delayed because the people around them did not believe in it. Eventually, they become a collection of reactions to other people's expectations. But solitude interrupts this process. When you step away, the noise begins to weaken. You stop receiving constant opinions. You stop explaining every decision. You stop checking whether people approve of your direction. At first, the silence can feel uncomfortable because you have become accustomed to external stimulation. You may feel the urge to return to the same conversations, the same distractions, the same people who kept your mind occupied. But beneath that discomfort is something valuable. Your own thoughts are beginning to return. You begin to ask questions you have avoided for years. What do I actually want? What am I doing only because other people expect it from me? Which relationships give me energy and which ones quietly consume it? What would I pursue if I knew nobody would applaud me? What would I stop doing if I no longer feared judgment? These questions are difficult because they remove the excuses. When you are constantly surrounded by people, you can blame the environment. You can say you are too busy. You can say you have no time. You can say that your circumstances make change impossible. But when you disappear, there is no audience to distract you from the truth. You begin to see how much of your life has been spent responding instead of choosing. And this realization can be painful. You may discover that some of your goals were never truly yours. You may realize that certain relationships survived only because you continued carrying them. You may notice that you have been giving attention to people who have given very little thought to your future. You may recognize that your constant availability has made you accessible to everyone except yourself. This is why disappearing is not always an escape. Sometimes it is a return to your priorities, a return to your instincts, a return to the part of you that existed before you became obsessed with being understood. When you are alone long enough, you begin to separate your genuine desires from the desires that were planted inside you by comparison, competition, insecurity, and social pressure. You begin to understand that not every opinion deserves equal weight. The loudest person is not always the wisest. The most confident person is not always correct. The person who criticizes your path may not even have the courage to walk their own. Yet when you are constantly exposed to their voices, you can begin to mistake volume for truth. Distance gives you perspective. You no longer react immediately. You pause. You observe. You allow your thoughts to develop before allowing someone else to shape them. This creates a different kind of strength. You become less impulsive, less dependent on approval, less vulnerable to emotional pressure. You no longer feel the need to announce every decision or defend every change. Your life becomes quieter, but your mind becomes clearer. And once you experience the clarity that comes from reclaiming your attention, you begin to recognize how expensive constant access really was. When you step away from people, something begins to reveal itself. Not immediately. At first, your absence may seem unnoticed. The conversations continue. The messages slow down. The world keeps moving as if nothing has changed. This can be uncomfortable because you may have believed that your presence mattered more than it actually did. But this discomfort is valuable. It forces you to observe instead of assume. When you are constantly available, you rarely know why people are around you. You cannot always distinguish between genuine care and simple convenience because your presence is always being offered. People may contact you because they miss you or because they need something. They may ask how you are because they truly care or because they want access to your attention, your advice, your resources, your emotional energy. As long as you remain constantly present, these motives can remain hidden beneath routine, but when you disappear, the pattern changes. The person who truly values you will notice the difference between your silence and your usual behavior. They may reach out without demanding anything. They may ask whether you are okay. They may respect your distance while still making it clear that your well-being matters to them. They do not immediately make your absence about themselves. They do not become angry simply because you are no longer available on demand. The person who only valued your usefulness behaves differently. They may become irritated. They may accuse you of changing. They may suddenly appear when they need something. They may remind you of how much you have done for them, not because they are grateful, but because they want to restore the access they once had. Your absence exposes a truth that your constant presence concealed. Some people were not attached to you. They were attached to what you provided. This is one of the most difficult lessons to accept. Many people believe they are surrounded by deep relationships when they are actually surrounded by repeated transactions. They give attention and someone gives them company. They provide emotional support and someone gives them temporary affection. They solve problems, offer advice, make themselves available, and assume the connection is mutual because the other person continues returning. But returning is not the same as caring. Some people return because they know you will always open the door. This is why distance becomes revealing. It removes the benefits that may have been attracting people to you. When you stop providing constant attention, who still remains? When you stop solving every problem, who still asks how you are? When you stop initiating every conversation, who makes the effort to find you? When you stop carrying the relationship alone, does the relationship continue moving? These questions can hurt, but they are necessary. You cannot accurately measure the value of a relationship while you are doing all the work required to keep it alive. Sometimes you must stop pushing the connection forward and observe whether the other person is willing to move toward you. This does not mean you should manipulate people with silence or deliberately create emotional confusion. The purpose is not to test everyone like an experiment. The purpose is to stop overextending yourself. Stop giving more than you can afford to lose. Stop offering unlimited access to people who have demonstrated limited investment. Your absence creates a natural boundary. It allows people to reveal themselves through their behavior rather than their promises. Words are easy when access is guaranteed. People can say they care, say they miss you, say you matter, say they will always be there. But when your presence is no longer immediately available, their actions become clearer. Some will make the effort, some will disappear, some will become angry, some will not notice at all. Each response contains information, and the most important part is that you do not need to argue with the information. You do not need to demand explanations. You do not need to chase someone and ask why they did not reach out. You simply observe, because one of the greatest forms of self-respect is allowing people to show you where you stand without forcing them to give you the answer you want to hear. When you stop making yourself endlessly available, you discover who misses your presence and who misses your usefulness, who values your existence and who only valued your access, who respects your silence and who feels entitled to break it. There is a version of you that can only be built when no one is watching, not because you need to hide forever, but because some transformations are too fragile to survive constant exposure. When you are rebuilding yourself, every opinion becomes a possible distraction. Every question can create doubt. Every explanation can pull your attention away from the work that must be done. This is why there are moments when you must step away from the world and enter a private season of reconstruction. Most people want to be seen while they are changing. They want others to notice the new habits, the new goals, the new discipline. They want recognition for the effort before the results have even appeared. But the need to be witnessed can become a weakness. When you constantly show people what you are trying to become, you begin to perform the transformation instead of completing it. You start thinking about how your progress looks rather than whether it is real. Private growth removes that pressure. When no one knows what you are doing, you can fail without embarrassment. You can begin again without explaining why you stopped. You can change direction without defending the decision. You can become a beginner without worrying that people will compare your current weakness to the confidence you once displayed. This freedom is powerful. The world often expects you to remain consistent with the identity it has already assigned to you. If people know you as the lazy one, they may be surprised when you become disciplined. If they know you as the confused one, they may question you when you become decisive. If they know you as someone who accepts everything, they may become uncomfortable when you develop boundaries. If people become attached to familiar versions of you, even those who claim to support your growth may prefer the version of you that does not challenge their expectations. Your transformation can make them uncomfortable because it changes the relationship. The moment you become more disciplined, they may no longer be able to invite you into the same distractions. The moment you become more ambitious, your priorities may no longer match theirs. The moment you develop self-respect, certain behaviors that once seemed normal become impossible to tolerate. This is why rebuilding often requires distance. You need space to become someone your old environment may not immediately recognize. Think of your life life as a structure. If the foundation is weak, decorating the outside will not save it. You can change your appearance, announce new goals, post motivational messages, and speak about your future, but none of these things matter if the internal structure remains unchanged. Real transformation begins with the invisible work. You examine your habits, you confront your excuses, you study your weaknesses, you learn to control your impulses, you develop skills, you become comfortable with delayed gratification. You make decisions that produce no immediate applause. This work is often boring, it is repetitive, it is invisible, and because it does not provide instant recognition, most people abandon it. They want the reward before they have earned the identity capable of sustaining it. But when you disappear, you remove many of the temptations that keep you trapped in the old version of yourself. You are no longer constantly comparing your progress to others. You are no longer seeking approval for every small improvement. You are no longer announcing goals that create the illusion of accomplishment before the actual work begins. You simply work quickly. You allow the days to accumulate: one workout, one book, one disciplined decision, one uncomfortable conversation, 1 hour of focused effort, one refusal to return to an old pattern. At first, these actions appear insignificant, but transformation is rarely dramatic while it is happening. It is usually the result of small choices repeated long enough to change your identity. Eventually, you begin to feel different. You no longer need to force discipline because discipline has become familiar. You no longer need to announce your boundaries because you naturally enforce them. You no longer need to convince people that you have changed because your behavior has become evidence. This is the advantage of rebuilding in private. You allow your actions to become stronger than your announcements. You do not tell people you are becoming more focused. You become focused. You do not tell people you are becoming more independent. You stop depending on their approval. You do not tell people you are becoming stronger. You quietly stop returning to the situations that weakened you. And while the world assumes nothing is happening, your internal structure is changing piece by piece, habit by habit, decision by decision, until the person who eventually returns is no longer the person who disappeared. There is a point in life when explaining yourself stops being communication and becomes a form of surrender. You keep presenting evidence of your intentions. You explain why you made a decision. You explain why you changed. You explain why you are no longer available. You explain why you need distance. You explain why you cannot continue giving what you once gave. And still the other person refuses to understand. At some point, you must recognize the difference between someone who does not understand you and someone who has decided not to understand you. These are not the same. The first person may need more information. The second person has already created a conclusion. No amount of explanation will satisfy them because the problem is not a lack of information. The problem is that they prefer their version of you. Some people need you to be selfish so they can justify their selfishness toward you. Some need you to be arrogant so they do not have to confront their own insecurity. Some need you to be cold so they can avoid acknowledging that they lost access to someone who once cared deeply. Their interpretation of you protects their ego, and when you try to correct that interpretation, you enter a trap. You give them more information. They use it to create more arguments. You answer one accusation and another appears. You clarify one misunderstanding and they question your clarification. You provide proof and they question the proof. The conversation never ends because the goal was never understanding. The goal was control. They want to keep you in a position where you are constantly defending yourself while they remain the judge. You explain, they evaluate, you respond, they criticize, you clarify, they demand more. Slowly, you become trapped in the exhausting role of proving your innocence to someone who has no intention of granting you freedom. This is why silence can become a form of self-respect. You do not owe everyone a complete explanation of your life. You are allowed to change your mind without submitting a detailed report. You are allowed to leave a situation because it no longer feels right. You are allowed to stop answering questions that are asked only to invade your privacy. You are allowed to protect your plans from people who have repeatedly shown that they cannot handle access to them. The need to be understood is one of the strongest forms of emotional dependence. You want people to see your intentions. You want them to know that you are not trying to hurt them. You want them to understand that you had reasons. You want them to recognize that you were patient, loyal, generous, and sincere. But the truth is that some people can see all of this and still choose to interpret you negatively because understanding you would require them to change their position, and many people would rather preserve their judgment than accept new information. So you continue explaining, hoping that the perfect sentence will finally make everything clear. You search for the right words, you rewrite messages, you replay conversations, you imagine what you should have said. You think that if you had only explained yourself better, they would finally understand. But sometimes the problem was never your explanation. Sometimes the person understood you perfectly. They simply did not like your decision. This is an important distinction. When you set a boundary, someone may say you have changed. Perhaps you have. That may be the entire point. You were supposed to change. You were supposed to become wiser about who receives your time. You were supposed to stop accepting the behavior that once damaged your peace. Growth often looks like betrayal to people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. And when they accuse you of changing, you may feel the urge to defend yourself. You may want to remind them of everything you have done. You may want to prove that you are still a good person, but you do not need to convince someone of your goodness by continuing to sacrifice yourself. A person who requires your exhaustion as proof of your loyalty is not asking for love, they are asking for control. There are moments when the most powerful response is to let people believe what they want. Allow them to misunderstand you. Allow them to create their own story. Allow them to speak about a version of you that no longer exists. You do not have to chase every false description of yourself. The people who genuinely know you will not need a courtroom presentation. The people committed to misunderstanding you will not be convinced by one, so you stop explaining, not because you are guilty, because your peace has become more valuable than their approval. You step away from the endless conversations, the accusations, the demands for justification, and the exhausting need to make your choices acceptable to everyone, leaving your actions to speak where your words were never going to be enough. There are moments when you must create distance from the world because transformation requires space. You cannot become something new while constantly holding on to everything that belongs to the person you used to be. Old environments, old routines, old conversations, old expectations, and old relationships can keep pulling you back into an identity you have already outgrown. Sometimes the reason you feel stuck is not because you lack ambition, but because you are surrounded by too much familiarity. Your absence creates space to think without interruption, space to make decisions without being questioned, space to discover what you actually want when no one else is influencing the direction. When you are constantly available, every moment of your life can be filled by someone else's needs. A message demands your attention, a problem demands your energy, an invitation changes your schedule, a conversation interrupts your focus. You become so busy responding to life that you never have the time to design it. This is how people lose years, not through one catastrophic decision, but through constant interruption. They wake up with plans, then spend the day responding to everyone else. They want to improve their health, but someone needs their attention. They want to build a business, but they are distracted by meaningless conversations. They want to study, but they are constantly checking what other people are doing. They want peace, but they continue returning to the same environments that create chaos. Eventually, they begin to believe that they lack discipline, but sometimes the problem is not discipline. Sometimes the problem is access. Too many people have access to your time. Too many distractions have access to your attention. Too many opinions have access to your decisions. You cannot protect your future while allowing everyone to freely enter your present. This is why your absence can become necessary. When you step away, you begin to reclaim the space that was being consumed by other people. You can finally hear the thoughts that were buried beneath constant noise. You can examine your life without immediately defending it. You can look at your relationships and ask whether they are truly nourishing you or simply keeping you occupied. Space creates perspective. When you are inside a situation every day, it can be difficult to understand what it is doing to you. You become accustomed to stress. You normalize disrespect. You accept exhaustion as a normal part of life. You convince yourself that a relationship is complicated when it is actually unhealthy. You tell yourself that a situation will improve because you are afraid to admit how much it has already cost you. But distance changes your vision. When you step away, you can finally see the pattern. You notice how often the same arguments repeat. You notice how frequently you are the one apologizing. You notice that the same people only appear when they need something. You notice that your mood changes after certain conversations. You notice how peaceful you feel when you are not around certain environments. This awareness is powerful because you cannot change what you refuse to see. Your absence also gives other people the opportunity to adjust to life without constant access to you. This is important because some relationships are built around your availability rather than mutual respect. People become accustomed to your immediate response, your constant support, your willingness to solve problems. When you step away, the dynamic changes. They must now carry what you once carried for them. And sometimes that is the only way they learn the value of what you were giving. But more importantly, you learn your own value. You discover that the world does not collapse when you stop responding immediately. You realize that not every problem belongs to you. You understand that people can survive without your constant intervention. You begin to see that you have been giving your energy away not because it was always needed, but because you were afraid of what would happen if you stopped. This fear keeps many people trapped. They believe that if they disappear, they will be forgotten. If they stop helping, they will become irrelevant. If they stop initiating, the relationship will end. If they stop explaining, people will judge them. But sometimes the relationship that disappears when you stop carrying it was never being carried by both people. Your absence reveals what your presence was hiding. It shows you which relationships have roots and which ones only existed because you kept watering them alone. And once you understand this, your relationship with distance changes. You stop seeing absence as something to fear. You begin to see it as a tool, a period of quiet, a chance to recover your energy, reorganize your priorities, and create a life that is not constantly interrupted by people who have become comfortable with your unlimited availability, there comes a moment when you must return to the world, but you should not return as the same person who left it. The purpose of disappearing is not to remain hidden forever. It is not to become bitter, isolated, or permanently disconnected from everyone around you. The purpose of disappearing is to reach a point where your sense of worth no longer depends on being accepted, praised, chosen, or constantly remembered by other people. You step away so you can rebuild your relationship with yourself, and when you return, you should no longer need anyone's approval to feel complete. Before you disappear, you may believe that you need certain people in order to feel valuable. You may depend on their messages, their attention, their validation, their invitations, their praise. You may measure your importance by how quickly someone responds to you or how badly they react when you are absent. But when you spend enough time alone, something begins to change. You discover that the silence does not destroy you. The unanswered message does not destroy you. The absence of applause does not destroy you. You continue living, you continue thinking, you continue growing. This realization creates a different kind of confidence. You begin to understand that approval is pleasant, but it is not necessary. Attention is enjoyable, but it is not the foundation of your identity. Being wanted is satisfying, but being unwanted by a particular person does not make you worthless. Once you understand this, people lose the ability to control your emotional state simply by giving or withdrawing their attention. You no longer chase every person who walks away. You no longer beg to be understood. You no longer change your personality to remain acceptable. You no longer force relationships to survive when the other person has already stopped investing in them. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop abandoning yourself in order to be cared for by someone else. That is the real purpose of returning. You return with standards, you return with boundaries, you return with a clearer understanding of what deserves your energy and what does not. Before disappearing, you may have believed that being alone was something to avoid. After disappearing, you begin to realize that being alone can be a source of strength. You learn that solitude is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness is the painful feeling that you need someone to complete you. Solitude is the peaceful understanding that you can stand on your own while still choosing meaningful connections. This difference changes everything. When you no longer need someone, you can finally choose them freely. You do not remain because you are afraid of being alone. You remain because the relationship genuinely adds value to your life. You do not accept disrespect because you fear losing the person. You walk away because your peace has become more important than their presence. You do not tolerate manipulation because you need their approval. You recognize that losing access to someone is sometimes less painful than losing access to yourself. This is when your relationships become healthier. You stop approaching people from desperation and begin approaching them from choice. You stop asking, how do I make them stay? You begin asking, do I even want them here? That question represents a major shift in power. When you need approval, you are constantly negotiating your worth. You are trying to convince people to choose you. You are trying to become more attractive, more useful, more agreeable, more impressive. But when you no longer need approval, you become more honest. You can say no, you can disagree, you can leave, you can be misunderstood, you can allow someone to dislike you without collapsing internally. This is the freedom that distance can create. You disappear to find yourself, and you return with less fear of rejection, less fear of criticism, less fear of being forgotten, less fear of standing alone. And because you are no longer terrified of losing people, you stop allowing people to use that fear against you. You become calm in situations that once made you desperate. You stop reacting to every withdrawal of attention. You stop chasing people who deliberately create distance to make you panic. You stop trying to prove your worth to those who have already decided to undervalue you. Your approval of yourself becomes the foundation. Other people's opinions may still matter, but they no longer control your identity. Praise can reach you without possessing you. Criticism can reach you without destroying you. Love can enter your life without becoming your entire reason for living. This is the person who returns from solitude, not someone who hates the world. It's someone who no longer needs the world to constantly reassure him that he belongs. And when you reach that point, your return is different. You no longer return to be seen. You return because you have something meaningful to contribute. You no longer return to prove that you have changed. You return because your life has changed. You no longer return begging for a place in rooms that once rejected you. You create your own room, your own standards, your own direction. Disappear until you can stand in silence without feeling forgotten. Disappear until rejection no longer defines you. Disappear until your confidence is no longer borrowed from the attention of others. Then return not as someone seeking approval, but as someone who has finally learned that the approval you were chasing from the world was never more valuable than the approval you owed yourself. When you no longer need anyone's approval, you become free to live according to your own judgment, and that freedom is the real reason you needed to disappear in the first place.